and welcome to Raw Machines, a journey exploring some of the most remarkable production processes around the world. Today, join me as we take a closer look at a craft that has nearly disappeared, the making of saddles and horse collar frames in Iikershide. No modern machinery, no industrial laminated wood, only natural horse chestnut wood, waiting times measured in years, and the patience of human hands. Let's begin. Eicherscheid is a small village located near Monschau. For many decades before and after the Second World War, it was widely known among traders and craftsmen, specializing in horse collar frames and pack saddles. The raw materials for this craft did not come from industrial sawmills. Instead, they were sourced from the hedgerows of the Hohes Venn region, where beech trees were pruned annually to serve as property boundaries. After being felled, the trunks are stored for 6 months to a year, sometimes even longer. The wood needs time to reach an equilibrium and release its internal stresses. The crosscut saw, measuring about 1.5 meters, is heavy and requires the involvement of the entire body. This is not a tool for the arms alone. Shoulders, back, hips, all must work together to create a rhythmic motion. During the sawing process, small wedges are skillfully driven into the kerf. These not only prevent the blade from binding, but also clear the path for the grain to split apart easily. Each blank takes about 10 to 15 minutes, but speed is not the priority. The sound of the blade and the vibrations transmitted through the hands tell the craftsman whether he is following the grain or fighting against it. The greatest advantage of naturally curved wood is that the grain follows the final shape of the saddle frame. Under pressure, the frame does not snap at a weak point. Instead, it dissipates the force along the curve. This is a quality that steam-bent or molded wood simply cannot fully replicate.
Zo, jetzt sind wir durch. Aushauen.
Hou de kasten eraan.
Ah, dan willen we daarin doen. Zo, dan willen we dat nog immersen. Moment. Zo Joep, jetzt haben wir hier auch noch 15 Zoll. Hier müssen wir noch was durchmachen.
Ja.
Hier haben wir auch noch 15 so. Hoffentlich kriegen wir da jetzt durch.
In the warehouse behind the workshop, they still keep tree trunks over 100 years old, with diameters of 20 to 24 inches. These were purchased collectively and shared through private agreements with the forest rangers, an economy based more on trust than on paperwork. At times, to cut through these massive trunks, the craftsmen use a specialized hollow tooth saw. Each cut can last up to half an hour. No one views this as a waste of time. The wood spent a lifetime growing twisted amidst the wind and snow. The craftsman is merely honoring that rhythm with his own patience.
Zo Joep, dan willen we de nächste halen, den schweren Joep.
Oh, dat is een juk.
Ja, hätten we een ons erop, joh.
Oh, ja. Oh.
Zo.
If the saddle frames require the patience of time, the sideboards pose a direct challenge to human strength. They must be split apart using an axe and a mallet rather than a slender saw blade.
Rest eraf, joh. Dan doen we eraf, dan heb je meer plaats.
The raw material consists of large trunks, 20 to 24 inches in diameter. The craftsman places a splitting axe, custom forged with a thick, heavy blade, onto the head of the trunk, then strikes it with a wooden mallet. The first blow opens the way. Subsequent strikes follow the natural fissures of the wood grain.
Zo, da ist schon noch recht. Dann riechst du die anderen noch und die Brücken. Muss aber fertig werden.
From a single trunk, the craftsman can extract 18 to 20 blanks, each about 3 inches thick and 15 inches long, just the right size for the saddle frame sideboards. This used to be one of the most grueling stages of the trade. A single misdirected axe blow could cause the blank to shatter uncontrollably, rendering an entire day's labor useless. Consequently, from the 1920s onward, bandsaws and electric circular saws were introduced to assist the process. Yet, even with machinery, the craftsman must still decide exactly where to place the blade. The machine only increases speed. It does not replace human judgment. After splitting, the blanks are meticulously inspected. Any pieces still containing red heart, the young wood at the center, which is weak and prone to cracking, are discarded. The bark is stripped while still fresh to allow the wood to dry faster and more evenly. The blanks are then stacked to season in a well-ventilated, sunny area, protected from moisture. This storage period lasts from 1 to 1.5 years, long enough for the wood to stabilize before entering the precise shaping stages. The saddle tree is the one part where mistakes are not allowed. It rests directly on the horse's back, where even the slightest misalignment can turn hard work into lasting pain. That's why, in Iikershide, people still say you can tell how long a craftsman has practiced the trade simply by looking at the saddle tree he makes. The wood used for saddle trees is usually fresher, taken from sweet chestnut trees 40 to 60 years old, with a diameter of about 14 inches. The craftsman splits the trunk into 3 or 4 blanks, selecting only the sections with the straightest, most even grain. While the wood still holds its natural moisture, the inner surface, the part that will rest against the horse's back, is hollowed out immediately. The blanks are then left to dry for another 6 to 12 months. During this time, the rough shape slowly stabilizes, giving the craftsman both the material and the time to observe, reflect, and plan the next refinements.
Ja, zoek ik maar anders.
Ja.
Deze twee, al gebeurd, has genoeg gedaan.
Ja.
In the subsequent stage, the craftsman carves the centerpiece from the fresh wood. Shaping the blank into a complete center section is the most time-consuming part of the entire pack saddle production, taking approximately an hour and a half. The craftsman uses a one-handed hatchet and a short-handled axe, carving across the grain, a difficult technique that requires just the right amount of force and precise sensation. The grain must not be allowed to tear or splinter. It must open up layer by layer, as if being shaved away rather than chopped off. Throughout the process, a tilt angle of about 80 degrees is constantly checked. The two ends of the saddle bridge are not identical. One end is narrower to sit closer to the horse's neck, while the other is wider to distribute the load over the rear back. This difference is not immediately visible to the eye, but the animal's body will remember it vividly if the craftsman gets it wrong.
Winkel des Mittelstücks. Durch die Neigung wird eine gleichmäßige Verjüngung des Mittelstücks erreicht, weshalb auch die beiden Kopfseiten verschieden breit sind.
Once the overall shape is finalized, the craftsman begins to hollow out the saddle's interior. The narrower end is deepened using a sharp, fine plane, as this area will rest against the base of the horse's neck. A wooden template is then repositioned to fix the shape and check the tilt of the two sides of the centerpiece. If the angle is not yet perfect, the craftsman marks the spot and uses a long plane to make precise adjustments. Using a slightly tapered marking gauge, the depth of the strap groove is carefully marked. The joints at the ends are further refined with the long plane. The strap groove is defined with a width of 4 to 5 inches. This is where the shafts of the wagon will be secured on the finished saddle. To stabilize the centerpiece, a specialized clamp for horse-drawn frame makers is used. The strap groove is then cut to a depth of about ½ an inch using a frame saw. Upon completion, the centerpiece is placed in the workbench recess, and the strap groove is cleaned out with a chisel. The remaining excess wood at the top of the groove is removed with a short-handled axe, an operation requiring high precision to avoid damaging the upper edges. The final stage takes place on the shaving horse. The blank is clamped with the feet, leaving both of the craftsman's hands completely free. A small draw knife is used to refine the sensitive contact points, while a long, straight knife handles the larger surfaces. This is a moment of absolute silence. No words, only the sound of steel on wood, and adjustments so subtle they are barely perceptible, yet decisive. When the saddle bridge leaves the shaving horse, it is not yet a finished product, but its final form has been established. The next task belongs to time, a process of slow seasoning, allowing the wood to stabilize and grow accustomed to its new shape before being assembled into the saddle frame. After a long period of lying dormant in storage, the saddle frames are finally called back to the workshop. By this time, the wood is nearly 2 years old, dry enough to no longer react unexpectedly, yet still retaining the necessary resilience. The craftsman does not select the blanks by eye alone. They use templates, simple yet precise wooden molds, to check the curves, the spread, and the length. The front frame is usually shorter, at about 15 inches. The rear frame is 3 to 4 inches larger, to balance the load when the saddle is heavily burdened. The center of each frame is meticulously identified. A single misplaced line would trigger a chain of errors later on. The craftsman marks the spot, then uses a narrow blade frame saw to cut along the determined line. The slender blade allows them to make minute adjustments, ensuring the cut does not disrupt the grain structure that already follows the natural curve. In Iikershide, the craft of yoke making has endured through many generations. Since at least the beginning of the 19th century, this trade has served as a vital source of livelihood for the village. The most prosperous period spanned from roughly 1890 to the 1930s, when at one point up to 20 villagers practiced the craft simultaneously. Each year, approximately 1,500 pack saddles and an equal number of ox yokes were produced. Production activities took place primarily during the winter months. Once completed, the saddles and yokes were transported by horse-drawn wagons to the railway station for distant distribution. They were typically sold to wholesalers in large batches of 2 to 3 dozen, while the craftsmen themselves also hand-delivered smaller orders to local saddlers and nearby customers. Before being fitted to the saddle bridge, the surface of the frame is cleaned with a finishing plane and a steel scraper. These tools do not remove much wood. They only shave away what is redundant. The edges are lightly rounded, not for aesthetics, but to protect the leather layer that will later wrap around them. When the frames are ready, they are test-fitted onto the saddle bridge. The craftsman does not nail them down immediately. They observe, disassemble, adjust, and then test fit again. Only when the frame sits perfectly, without being forced and without springing out of position, are they fixed in place. This is a moment that allows for no hesitation, yet accepts no haste. The sideboards are the most temperamental part of the assembly process. The craftsman does not rush into shaping them immediately, but first observes the curvature of the installed front and rear frames. Those two curves are rarely identical, as they come from two different tree trunks that grew under different conditions. For this reason, the sideboard must be carved with a slight twist, just enough to follow both ends without creating tension. The work proceeds through constant test fitting. The board is placed into position, removed, marked at the pressure points, and then carved further. Each shaving removes only a tiny amount, for if too much is taken, the wood cannot be replaced. When the board rests in place without being forced and without springing back, it is the first sign of correctness. Once the overall shape meets requirements, the craftsman uses a saw to diagonally cut away the excess, streamlining the profile of the sideboard. These cuts are not merely for aesthetics. They also help reduce weight and avoid unnecessary stress concentrations when the saddle frame carries a heavy load. Once the sideboards fit, the work shifts to the final decisive steps, preparing the contact surfaces and permanently securing the entire saddle frame. The front contact point is cut to a depth of about 3/4 of an inch, while the rear is only about 1/2 an inch. This difference is not for symmetry, but to distribute pressure evenly when the frame is under load. A chisel is used first to establish the plane, followed by a paring chisel to refine hard-to-reach areas. Finally, a long plane is pulled slowly and steadily until the contact surfaces become continuous, even, and tight. The craftsman does not seek absolute geometric perfection, but rather a seamless fit, the sensation of wooden parts meeting without the need for forced pressure. Before nailing it together, the entire frame undergoes a final inspection. The craftsman sights along the axis, places hands on every joint, and shakes it gently to feel its stability. Only when everything stands naturally still, without creaks or abnormal movement, is the hammer picked up. The nails are driven in decisively, without hesitation. This is not a step for experimentation. Once the nails enter the wood, the shape of the saddle frame is considered locked. Afterward, all edges are reviewed once more, smoothing out any remaining burrs to ensure no sharp or protruding points remain. The finished frames are stacked in groups of 3 for packaging. In this state, they are still raw, without their outer leather layers, but structurally, everything is complete.
Ja, nee, also zusammen. Ich muss morgen noch an der Karre, ja, die nach der Bahn, ich muss sofort. Bitte, so gehen. Ja, also zusammen. Ich muss morgen fort mit der Karre Bahn. Wo geht ihr hin? Ich hab wieder Holz noch aufgetan.
From here on, the saddle frame is no longer a collection of wood, but a unified body ready to carry weight, movement, and the trust of both man and horse on the long roads ahead.
Er zijn nog een paar breuken ready die oude haast. Ja, dan afgaan. Ja.
Wie nog de beste dus?
Ja, eens kijken wat we schreeuwen. Nou ja. Past het zo?
Ja, het stimmt schon alles. Weer is hier weer.
Ja.
The horse collar frame is the last part to be made, but it is by no means an afterthought. Throughout the entire process, the wood accounts for only about 1/5 of the workload. The rest belongs to leather, metal, and the skill of the saddlers. However, if it is made incorrectly from the start, every outer layer of leather is merely covering a root flaw. The craftsmen in Iikershide understand this, so they carry out the work with a quiet caution. The wood chosen is still naturally curved beech, which has been stored for 1.5 to 2 years. The curve is not for decoration, but to fit snugly against the horse's neck, distributing the pulling force evenly. Before sawing, the craftsman places a template on the blank and draws the pattern directly onto the wood. There are no paper blueprints. The shape of the collar already exists within the tree trunk. The craftsman's task is simply to reveal it. After the overall shape is sawn out, the blank, approximately 2.5 inches thick, is split longitudinally into 2 symmetrical parts. It is this operation that creates the pair of left and right horse-drawn frames. Each saw cut lasts 10 to 15 minutes, long enough to clearly feel the change in the wood grain as it travels from one curve to the next. Once the two rough bars are obtained, the cleaning process begins. Finishing planes and scrapers are used to remove every saw mark and sharp ridge. The edges are carefully beveled, not for aesthetics, but to protect the leather wrapping that will follow.
Ja, haben wir das Spiel, ne?
Ja.
Today, the craft of making horse-drawn frames in this small village has almost receded into memory, but every remaining curved frame carries a value greater than its own utility. It is the value of a way of working that respects the material, respects the animal, and accepts a slow pace to achieve long-lasting durability. In silence, the horse-drawn frame becomes the final word of the wood, and also the farewell of a craft that is gradually coming to a close. When a collar frame leaves the workshop in Iikershide, it carries no maker's mark and requires no introduction. Its value does not lie in identification, but in the quiet endurance of its use. A good saddle frame makes no sound when the horse walks. A properly made collar frame allows the animal to forget it is even there. That is the highest measure of the craft. The entire journey of making, from selecting a naturally curved tree in the forest, waiting years for the wood to settle on its own, to every saw stroke, axe cut, and final joint, is a sequence of decisions that cannot be rushed. At each step, the craftsman does not seek to impose his will on the material, but learns to work with it. The wood leads, the human follows. It is this humility that produces objects capable of enduring years of demanding labor. Every finished saddle frame or collar frame is the result of countless small decisions, where error is not merely a technical matter, but an ethical one. A millimeter too much or too little affects not only durability, but directly the horse's back, neck, and breathing. This craft therefore demands a rare sense of responsibility. Responsibility toward the material, toward the object, and toward the living being that M. Today, as machines can reproduce forms faster, cheaper, and more uniformly, the craft of handmade collar frame making has nearly faded into the past. Yet its value does not lie in competing with industry. It lies in a different way of thinking, where quality is not measured by speed, but by harmony, where technique is inseparable from work ethics, and where humans accept their limits in order to work. B. When the long sound of the saw has fallen silent, when winter workshops no longer glow with fire, those curves remain. They live on in old saddle frames, in collar frames darkened by time, and in the memory of a craft that once taught people how to slow down in order to do things right. This is not only the heritage of Eicherscheid, but a shared reminder. Some values cannot be accelerated, cannot be standardized, and should not be forgotten, for they once enabled people to work with endurance, care, and humanity. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If you enjoy films like this, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future stories. This is Raw Machines. Thank you, and see you next time.